Back in March 2019, a storm of almost unimaginable power just slammed into southeastern Africa. The devastation it left behind was so huge, so vast, that people were describing it as an inland ocean. So today, we're going to break down the anatomy of that catastrophe, Cyclone Idai. Just think about that for a second. An inland ocean. That was the chilling description from people looking at satellite images after Cyclone Idai had passed. It's a phrase that almost sounds impossible, right? But it perfectly captures the sheer, terrifying scale of the flooding that literally submerged entire landscapes. So how on earth does something like that happen? Well, let's get into it. So, where does a monster storm like Idai even come from? To really understand the destruction that happened on land, we first have to go to its birthplace, way out over the ocean. Okay, so first, a super quick refresher on what a tropical cyclone actually is. At its core, you can think of it like a giant spinning engine of destruction. It's fueled by all that warm, moist air over tropical waters. So just picture this huge spinning vortex of wind and rain, all organized around a calm central eye. That's exactly what was brewing over the Indian Ocean. Now, take a look at this number, 28 degrees Celsius. That was the temperature of the sea surface in the Indian Ocean where Idai was born. And you have to understand, for a tropical cyclone, water this warm is like high-octane fuel. It provided this immense energy that the storm needed not just to form, but to rapidly, and I mean rapidly, intensify into a monster. All that energy had to go somewhere. And on March 14th, 2019, it was finally unleashed, right onto the coast of Mozambique. This timeline, man, it just shows you how terrifyingly fast this whole disaster unfolded. Idai formed, it rapidly intensified over that warm ocean water, and then it just slammed into the city of Beira as a powerful Category 3 storm. There was precious little time to prepare for the fury that was about to hit. And this slide really illustrates that Idai wasn't just one threat. It was a devastating 1-2 punch. On one hand, you had these ferocious winds. We're talking 175 kilometers per hour, powerful enough to rip roofs clean off of buildings and just tear down infrastructure. But on the other hand, you had biblical amounts of rain. Over 200 millimeters in just a few days. That's like getting several months' worth of rain all at once. That is the exact recipe for creating that inland ocean we talked about at the start. The wind and rain were the cause, but the effect was a humanitarian disaster on a scale that's, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Let's look at the numbers, because they tell a horrifying story. The human cost was just staggering. Across Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, more than 1,300 people lost their lives. And the number of people whose lives were just completely turned upside down? Over 3 million? I mean, think about that. 3 million people dealing with being displaced, losing their homes, and having their entire livelihoods just destroyed. And in the city of Beira, right where the cyclone made landfall, the destruction was nearly total. An estimated 90% of the entire city was damaged or just completely wiped out. Homes, schools, hospitals, simply gone. The economic toll of this single event was, well, staggering. More than $2 billion in damages. For developing nations like Mozambique and Zimbabwe, a blow of this magnitude is devastating. It can set back progress for years, maybe even decades. This table really brings home the cascading effects of the disaster, how one thing leads to another. So on the human front, you have hundreds of thousands of people displaced, their lives just in turmoil. Economically, a huge portion of the region's farmland, which is a source of both food and income, was totally wiped out, leading to severe food shortages. And then came the devastating health crisis. The contaminated water led to deadly cholera outbreaks, with over 6,000 cases just overwhelming the already destroyed medical facilities. But in the face of all that devastation, the story has to turn to the response, right? I mean, how do you even begin to help when the scale of the disaster is so immense? Well, the whole process really breaks down into two key phases. First, you've got the immediate life-saving response, and second, there's the much, much longer and harder road of recovery and rebuilding. In those first chaotic hours and days, the priorities were crystal clear. You had search and rescue teams working around the clock to find survivors who were trapped by the floodwaters. International aid organizations like the UN and the Red Cross rushed in to distribute the absolute essentials for survival: food, water, and shelter. And critically, they focused on providing clean water to fight back against the deadly spread of diseases like cholera. But, beyond the immediate response, Cyclone Idai taught the world a really harsh lesson. This wasn't just a random weather event. It was a brutal reminder of the deadly intersection of poverty, vulnerability, and a changing climate. And here's why this is so important to understand. A storm of this power would be devastating anywhere on Earth. But it was particularly catastrophic here because these are low-income countries. They just have limited infrastructure and fewer resources to withstand that initial shock, and then to mount the kind of massive, effective response that's needed in the aftermath. So, the long-term recovery effort isn't just about replacing what was lost. No way. It's about building back better. And that means creating stronger roads and buildings that can actually withstand future storms, improving housing standards, and, this is vital, investing in much better early warning systems to give people more time to get to safety when the next storm threatens. And that brings us to the final critical question that Cyclone Idai leaves all of us with. We know that warmer oceans fuel more intense storms. So as our world continues to warm, the threat of another Idai, or maybe even something worse, is very, very real. The challenge for all of us is to figure out how we protect the communities that are on the front lines of this climate crisis, the ones who have done the least to cause it but are suffering the absolute most. That's the enduring lesson of this catastrophe.